Hello, everyone. Welcome to ACMP's Global Connect. The future of change is now. This is premier virtual global change management conference, and I am so humbled that I was chosen as a virtual presenter today. My sincere hope today is that you just take a few things with you that you can use both in your professional and your personal lives, but with the overarching theme of driving high-performing teams. So we'll get started, but I'm super excited that you found my little corner of the internet. Thanks so much for being here. This is where we begin. Constructive conversations. Wow, what a massive topic with so much breadth and depth. I could do a 3-day workshop on this topic alone. Nonetheless, though, in the context of this presentation, we're really going to break apart why psychological safety and radical candor create the highest performing teams possible. I think this is a topic that probably interests us all. We all want to do our best work and we all want our teams to do the best work that they can. And I really think that creating an environment is important to do that. And these are some of the things that we can use to do that. Before we go any further, massive shout out to Timothy Clark and Kimberly Scott. They are the founders of these concepts. And they've both fundamentally changed the way that I do my job every day. So at the end of this presentation, there's a recommended reading list. I highly recommend that you take the time to buy some of their material, to read some of their material wherever you can find it. Again, fundamentally has changed the way that I look at how I do my job and allowed me to really kind of get into the weeds a little bit better about how these things can work a little bit more cohesively. So super excited to get started. Here we go. So who is this person that ACMP has asked to speak with you all today? Well, officially, my name is Chelsea Walsh, and I love throwing this slide into presentations because I think it really helps you get to know me a little bit better as a person and not only as a professional. I think it's super awesome to talk about our professional spheres and this big, beautiful world of change management, but there's also humans on the other side of that. So I think this is kind of a neat concept, and I'm just going to keep it going here. So during the day, I'm a senior consultant with M&P Digital. But on the side, I'm also a performance coach, mainly dealing with up-and-coming leaders and middle management who really want to get better at communication in general, performance management, things like how do I motivate a team who's really unmotivated? How do we get through major aspects of change? But again, mostly focused on the communication aspects of how do I deal with people a little bit better to get a little bit better net result for sort of everybody involved. And then on top of that, I'm super heavily involved in the fitness industry. I used to be a power lifter. Now I consider myself a bodybuilder. My husband and I have a business in the fitness space that he's the primary worker in, and that's awesome. We have a lot of fun and meet a lot of really cool athletes from all over the world. So that's really neat. I'm an adventurer. I love traveling. I'm always on a motorcycle or in a car or on a plane. We do a lot of travel to Florida because we love the sunshine. I'm also just, again, in general, a human. That's my husband and I on the beach in Barbados. We just got married this past December, so that was really neat. And on the right, I would consider myself a change in a culture leader at this point. I do a lot of culture transformation work also because I think culture, as you'll see later in this presentation, plays a huge role in all of this and sort of creating cultures of inquiry and, again, cultures of psychological safety. So I think culture is a huge piece of this that can't go undiscussed. And then I guess in general, I just say I'm a service-based leader. I think the values piece is a huge thing. And so I always sort of talk about values and how they underpin all of this. And so for me, my specific value set that applies to both my personal and my professional life are very specifically teamwork, collaboration, growth, and overall well-being. So that's me in a nutshell. And also I'm Batman. I'm just kidding. Let's keep going. So why am I here? I would say that over the course of my career, the biggest, most impactful critical blocker is communication or lack thereof. And I think constructive or uncomfortable conversations can be a really scary thing for some people. And so I've sort of made it a part of my personal mission to try and give people more tools in their tool belt and to empower them to become better at communicating whether it's one-on-one or in a boardroom or whatever that looks like, just to give them more tools in their tool belt to empower them to do a better job at that. I think when we are clear with our communication and confident in our approach, it makes a world of difference in the overall well-being of the organization, our clients, our stakeholders, and everybody in between benefits and gets really healthy when we have a handle on that. And for sure, to acknowledge it can absolutely be scary, no doubt. But it's like anything else, right? Practice makes perfect. And so I think that part of what I'd like to do here with regards to creating awareness is sort of help people understand maybe what can be perceived as uncomfortable. I'd like to explain what it sort of means to communicate at a higher level and how we can use constructive conversations to benefit the team overall and have it not be such a horrifying thing. I'd like to promote some understanding and help everybody sort of understand how this can eventually become a competitive advantage, because I do think that this really has a deep impact on teams when you can get it right and you can open the door to actually having just great conversation regardless of the situation. I think that's something that not everybody has access to, and people really aspire to be in environments like that. I'd like to provide some strategies for sort of self-awareness and then how we go into those conversations that you can actually utilize. I'd like to address some blockers and sort of help people ask the question of like, how can we proactively deal with some of this stuff and deal with these problems and solution them with a little bit more ease than before. And then I'd just like to facilitate some reflection. So what questions can we ask to sort of deepen our understanding, and how can we explore ways to continue to apply the concepts that we learned here within our specific environments, within our specific teams. So that's why I'm here. So I love quotes, and sometimes I think they do a really, really great job of illustrating things, and this one is no different. So this is from David White. He's an author, a poet, and does a lot of live speaking, and he really focuses on what he considers the transformative nature of work and also the conversational nature of reality. And so the quote goes, "The courageous conversation is the one you don't want to have." And I would hazard a guess that probably every single person on this virtual presentation right now has had to have a conversation or needed to have a conversation, and they just really didn't want to do it. And that summarizes why this presentation even exists, because it's that feeling in the pit of your stomach where you're like, man, I really don't want to have to do this, or you don't feel equipped to do it, or you just feel a little bit nervous, or you could be the most confident leader in the world, but you still have this little bit of hesitation. So that is why this presentation exists, and this is a great quote going into the rest of this. So you may have noticed that in David White's quote, he very specifically uses the term courageous conversation. I'm sure that everybody has heard that terminology before. Courageous conversation is a super popular way of referring to, again, sort of the same type of thing, conversation you don't want to have, you need to have it. But I would like to shift the paradigm just a little bit, and let's break down why. So when we look at the definition of courageous, so having or characterized by courage, and then let's see what the definition of courage is. Mental or moral strength to venture, persevere, and withstand danger, fear, or difficulty. Man, when I am having conversations, I do not want to be thinking about fighting dragons at the same time. So immediately when something is titled a courageous conversation, it has this like wildly sort of dramatic feel to it, because you have to have a courageous conversation. And you're courageous when you fight dragons and when you go to battle and like stuff like that. I think in the context of conversations, this is why I want to shift the paradigm. I'd like to take it from courageous to constructive. Let's look at the definition of constructive: promoting improvement or development. Wow, even just saying that out loud, for me personally, I feel two totally different ways. When I'm trying to be courageous, I am in a different mindset. When I'm trying to be constructive, it's just way more, well, there's no other way to say it, way more constructive. So I'd be interested to know if even just hearing this, that you automatically switch back and forth between the two and you feel a difference within your body and you feel a difference sort of in your brain with how you perceive it. But I do think it's true that when you set yourself up for success and you put yourself in that sort of constructive mindset, it's automatically going to go better than it did if you thought you were fighting a dragon. Now let's talk about what a constructive conversation actually is. And all it is a discussion between two or more people that serves a useful purpose. Remembering from the last slide that the definition of constructive is promotes improvement or development. That's the goal. So examples of this could be a one-on-one with your coach, you giving or receiving feedback about a project deliverable. You could be discussing a project in general. You could be talking to a coworker who potentially has offended you, critiquing a colleague's work, giving an unfavorable performance review. There are lots of scenarios that we see on an everyday basis that could be used as an example of a constructive conversation. And sometimes these conversations can be super basic and fluid. And I mean, a lot of this is dependent on the relationship that you have between the people and the personalities involved and the situation, what's going on in people's personal lives, what's going on in the professional workplace. Is it a very stressful time, end of fiscal, whatever. But when the stakes are high, I like this triangle, right? So at times we have to have more challenging conversations. And what is that, what is that made up of? So when the stakes are high, there are opposing opinions or strong emotions. These conversations can broach really complex, sensitive subjects and evoke really strong emotional responses, which can be really challenging and difficult to deal with, both for the recipient of the information and the giver of the information. So for me, the key skill of effective leaders and teammates is the capacity to sort of skillfully address challenging topics and inspire positive outcomes at the same time, while doing so in the most comfortable, organic, confident manner possible. When I facilitate some of these topics live, one thing I really like to do is ask the open question, like, what does it feel like and how do you feel when you have to have a difficult or a constructive conversation? And an array of words usually come up to describe this scenario. I've put some of them here. Some people feel really great and have no issue at all, but some people are rigid, stressed, tense, anxious, apprehensive, nervous, jumpy, all these different words. So I'd be curious, for you to just take a second while we're going through this presentation and sort of self-evaluate what your thought is when I ask this question about how do you feel when you have to have a difficult conversation. We're going to use this in the next few slides. I want to talk about the actual physiological response to stress itself. So, countless generations of genetic shaping has driven us as humans to handle constructive conversations with flying fists and flying feet, not intelligent intellectual persuasion and gentle attentiveness. When we perceive there is a threat, whether it's real or not, our body automatically responds without us even being aware of what's happening. So say, for example, somebody says something that you really disagree with on a topic that matters to you a lot, and the hair on the back of your neck stands up, but the hairs you can handle, but your body's just going to keep going a few steps further and it'll continue to respond. So your adrenaline gets pumped into your bloodstream. This isn't by choice. This is literally a built-in physiological response the way nature intended. Your adrenal glands don't listen to your cognitive thought stream. They listen to your subconscious responses of your body that your body has without you even knowing it. The only problem is you're in the boardroom trying to have a constructive conversation and you're not being attacked by a tiger. And it gets worse before it gets better. After your adrenals pump out adrenaline, you start getting fired up. This is ready to fight, or freaked out. That's ready to flight. Your brain diverts blood from activities it deems non-essential to high priority tasks such as hitting, don't do that, and running, don't do that either. So your body gets more blood and your brain gets less, but you need the blood in your brain. So this doesn't particularly help with being clear-headed in the moment when you're called upon essentially to deal with tough topics. So here's a list. If your brain perceives the constructive conversation as a stressful event, this is what happens. Activation of the sympathetic nervous system, both adrenaline and noradrenaline systems, emotional activation, cognitive impairment, a whole laundry list. So thanks, evolution. So how do we typically handle this? And there's typically three sort of traditional responses. We'll talk about the first one. So avoidance. We all know that avoidance does not solve our problems. It just puts them aside for a time being, but it's not any type of resolution. But I can say that there are some pretty valid reasons, at least they feel like valid reasons for us to do so. So a big one is we're maybe worried that we're going to make the situation worse. We're uncertain of the outcome. Maybe there's just a general lack of trust in the office or with the team. But I would say the two biggest ones that I see all the time is fear of negative response and fear of conflict, because nobody wants to get in a fight or get into a disagreement. That's a totally natural response. So I'd also be lying if I said that I haven't at one point or another in my career, likely near the beginning, but I have done all of this at some point because it was so uncomfortable and I didn't have the tools in my toolbox to be able to mitigate some of this. So I want you to feel supported. If you're still in a situation where this is kind of how you handle things, that's okay. That's why we're here. And there is a way to come out of it. Like I said, it's just about putting tools in your toolkit, and practice makes perfect. The second way is once we move on from avoiding them, we could face them and handle them poorly. And same thing, there's a lot of different reasons and contributing factors to why that might be the case too. So um, a big one is lack of clarity in expressing thought. So when you get into that sort of physiological stress response, it makes sense that your thoughts will get a little bit jumbled and all over the place. Perhaps listening isn't your best suit. Maybe active listening is something that we need to work on, or emotional interference or general lack of understanding. And all of these things can apply to either the recipient or the giver of the information. So this is the second way, but obviously the third way, what we really want to aspire to do here is face them and handle them well. And everybody wins in the end when we're able to do this. And what does this take? Emotional intelligence and emotional regulation, feeling when those physiological stress activators happen, feeling that and being able to sort of emotionally regulate through that. Active listening, make sure you're listening to the other person and really figure out what's going on. Maybe there's things that you didn't consider or you didn't know were happening. Empathy and understanding, we need to put ourselves in our teammates' shoes and sort of, take a step back. And again, maybe there's things that we hadn't considered before. And also a huge dose of self-awareness and patience, right? I think sometimes in leadership positions, we've come a long way in our careers, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody has. So a self-awareness of not only how we're handling the conversation, but also where we're at in our career, as well as the person on the other side of the conversation, right? So a good dose of patience always does a body good. So that's where we'll leave it for this slide. Okay, full disclosure, this is quite possibly one of my favorite slides of this deck and something that I talk about ad nauseum. I think this is a really important thing to discuss. I also come from a bit of a different perspective here. And so I will say that there's more than one way to do everything. And so if the sandwich theory of feedback is a way that really works for you and you net a really positive result, then you do you, man. I think it's really important that we all, again, use the tools that are right for the job and that are really right for us. For those who might not be sure, well, I'll go into a little quick description about what sandwich theory is. So the sandwich theory of feedback is basically sandwiching your constructive and or negative critique piece in between two positives of feedback. So a positive statement, your constructive or critical or something that needs to be worked on, and then a positive statement at the bottom. But for me, I really come from this land of like authentic, and we're going to get into radical candor and the radically candid approach a little bit later, but I come from this authentic place of like, I just want to have a real conversation. And I do think that you can have the ability to do that really gracefully, even if it's around a topic that's really hard. Again, that's the point of this whole presentation. So, I don't like this for a few different reasons, the sandwich theory. And one is that it dilutes the message. I think that your message gets lost. It's very easy for it to create confusion. I think it perhaps could undermine trust because then you're coming to this person and you're just kind of trying to bury the real message in between everything else. It typically just generally comes across as inauthentic. It reinforces negative associations because now all of a sudden you're not just getting a positive, you're getting a positive, and then somewhere in the middle of it is something you need to work on, or maybe something that's not so great, and then a positive again. So it becomes, every time somebody wants to have a conversation, it becomes a question of like, well, is this person coming to me with good news, or is this something I have to worry about? And there's a negative association with positive feedback. And it just hinders direct communication. I think it is super important to get to a place where you can have real conversations about real issues. And a big piece of this, I'll probably get into this a little bit later too, but a big piece of this is making sure that everybody that you work with knows that you have their back. So even if you're bringing something to them that is a challenge, or maybe they didn't complete a deliverable correct, or maybe they handle a client situation really inappropriately, for you to have that relationship with them so that they understand that when you're coming to them to speak to them about this kind of thing, that you have their back. That's really important. So I kind of call this anti-sandwich theory because I'm just not a fan. But again, you got to do you. So if you've netted really great results with that before, then perhaps this just gives you maybe something to, like a concept to think about that is a little bit different than what you're used to, but you got to do what works. Okay, now time for the fun stuff. So welcome to the concept of radical candor. This concept was created by a lovely individual named Kim Scott. I mentioned her at the beginning of the presentation, and some of her material will be at the end. So if you would like to reference and read more about it, I highly recommend that you pick up her book. It was a wonderful read. So radical candor in general is sort of universally human, but interpersonally and culturally relative. Both dimensions of radical candor are sensitive to context. The two axes on this graph are care personally and challenge directly, and each one of the quadrants sort of revolves around those two axes. And it's important to note also that they get measured at the listener's ear and not at the speaker's mouth. It also only works if the person understands that your efforts at caring personally and challenging directly are delivered in good faith. So a little bit like I said on the slide right before this, when you're engaging somebody, specifically using radical candor as a tool, they must know that you have their back and that you are coming from a place of constructiveness. If you are in an organization who has not sort of evolved culturally yet, radical candor may be something very difficult to implement. It's definitely worth investigating, but this is definitely culturally relative because some organizational cultures just won't have it. So use all of this with a grain of salt and move the needle as much as you can, but be cognizant of that. And I think that organizations who have done a really great job at sort of open and transparent communication and authenticity and all that stuff, this concept works really well because it's not a departure from, it's not a super big departure from what most of them are probably already doing. It's just a little bit of a way to frame it and contextualize it so that people understand a little bit better. So this grid can be used to just be more conscious of what kind of guidance you're not only getting, but also what you are giving and what you are encouraging. It's important to realize that each one of the quadrants refers to behaviors and not personality traits, and I would really encourage everybody on this presentation to not personalize it. It's just a way to gauge praise and criticism and to help people remember to do a better job of offering both. It also shouldn't be used to label people. I think there sometimes is a tendency out in the work world to like pin people into labels, but all that does is hinder improvement. And what we're trying to do here is just generally do a better job and improve at everything in the effort of continuous improvement. So ultimately, with this chart, all of us spend time in each different quadrant. And those of us familiar with the concepts would probably try and aspire to be radically candid all the time. But again, it's an enmeshment of all of these things. And we all spend time in a separate quadrant at some point in our career. So it's about learning how do we be more consistent and how do we just do a little bit better, again, in the effort of continuous improvement. So be cognizant and be conscious, and this graph is, or this framework is supposed to do that with regards to like how you deliver certain message. And remember, progress over perfection. So let's walk through each one of the quadrants. So obnoxious aggression. When you criticize somebody without even taking 2 seconds to show that you care, the guidance is going to feel obnoxiously aggressive to the recipient. I will say, if you cannot be radically candid yet, obnoxiously aggressive is the second best thing you could do, and I will explain why. It's because then at least your team knows what you think and where you stand, which is way better than them absolutely being in the dark and having no idea where you're at. That being said, obnoxious aggression can absolutely be debilitating to the recipient, particularly in the extreme. Examples of exceptionally obnoxious aggressive behavior can be belittling, embarrassing publicly, or freezing out. An example, a tangible perhaps example that some of you on this call might be able to relate to is the movie The Devil Wears Prada. The character that Meryl Streep plays, Anna Wintour. Within the context of that specific movie, Anna Wintour is very, very obnoxiously aggressive with how she criticizes Anne Hathaway's character. And then to kind of carry on just a little bit more, it's when people over criticize others to humiliate them rather than to help them improve, or permit personalized attacks among team members, or discourage praise as babysitting people's egos. Their behavior, all of those behaviors will feel obnoxiously aggressive to the people around them. So fortunately for us, we can choose to take that passion that perhaps manifests in a way that's not so constructive and push it into the radically candid quadrant instead, with a few different tweaks, and we can have better conversations as a result of that. So let's move into a manipulative insincerity. So this happens when you don't care enough about somebody to challenge them directly. And that sounds very blunt, but it's a blunt concept. People give praise and criticism that is manipulatively insincere when they are too focused on being liked or think they can gain some sort of advantage by being fake. Guidance that is manipulatively insincere rarely reflects what the speaker actually thinks. Rather, it's an attempt to push the other person's emotional buttons in return for some personal gain. And this is really awful to think about it, but it does happen. Again, in using these tools and getting to know the identification of each quadrant and how to sort of push our responses into the radically candid, more productive quadrant, that's all we're trying to do here. When people behave badly and get called out for it, an all too natural response is that they become less genuine, more political, and they move from obnoxious aggression into manipulative insincerity. And it is my belief that it would be better to say nothing at all than to move in the wrong direction on the challenge directly axis. So keep that in mind. Manipulative insincerity is pretty awful at its root. Then there's ruinous empathy. So I've tried to take the metaphor that I usually use and sort of make it a little more audience friendly. There's an old sort of Russian antidote, and I'm going to say that this man has a dragon because maybe it's a little bit easier to piece together. But he has a dragon that he really loves, but unfortunately the dragon's tail is really hurt and he has to amputate it. But because he doesn't want to amputate the dragon's tail right away, he cuts off a piece of it one at a time rather than all at once. In this case, his desire to spare the dragon pain and suffering only leads to more pain and suffering. And most people want to avoid creating tension or discomfort at work. So praise that's ruinously empathetic is not effective because its primary goal is to make the person feel better rather than to point out really great work and push for more of it, including discussing what could have been better. So this is just a case of you don't want to tell somebody when something needs to be better because you don't want to hurt their feelings. Also, when bosses are too invested in everybody getting along, they also fail to encourage people on their team to criticize one another for fear of sowing discord. But again, I'm a firm believer in that just because we disagree and or because mistakes, like I'm a big believer of fail fast and make mistakes fast and then let's learn from it. But I think when we're not able to talk about some of that, it just kind of creates this false paradigm where we're just kind of existing in the ether. We're not actually improving on anything because we just don't want to talk about the stuff that's not working great. They create the kind of work environment where being nice is prioritized at the expense of critiquing and therefore actually improving performance. Again, to a little bit of what I said before. A common mistake is to think that if you hang out in the ruinously empathetic quadrant, you're pleasant to work with, but over time, if the only feedback you've ever given somebody is good job and other vaguely positive comments, people are going to know that they've done some things wrong, but they have no idea what they were, and they'll have no idea how to improve on those things because you don't want to provide the feedback that they need. And then in that case, the people really aren't given an opportunity that they deserve to learn and grow through that. So those are the first three. And then we're going to get into the radical candor itself. But here, let's work through an example first, and then I'll really put a point on radical candor. So what does this look like? Ruinous empathy. You're silent. You're worried about the other person's feelings. Manipulative insincerity. You're silent, but you're worried about your own feelings. Obnoxious aggression. This example is somebody has something in their teeth. Obnoxious aggression. Oh my God, you have something in your teeth. Aggressively, embarrassingly, making a big scene. Probably didn't need to go that way. But what does radical candor look like? Radical candor just looks like, hey, you have something in your teeth. What is this doing? It's creating an atmosphere of I have your back, but we got to fix something. So just like, and then they're going to take the thing out of their teeth and they're going to be a lot more confident and really happy that they didn't walk around with something in the middle of their teeth all day. So the concept of radical candor is just being genuinely authentic and dealing with stuff out in the open in a kind and gracious way so that people know where they stand, they know what they have to improve on, and they have the tools to do it. So this is it in a nutshell. Care personally on one side, challenge directly on the other. Radical candor is right in the middle. I'm going to both care personally about this individual and also challenge them directly on whatever we think we need to talk about. And in the end, radical candor builds trust and opens the door for all sorts of communication that will help you achieve the results that you're aiming for. Again, I think one of the goals or one of the things I stated when I first started talking in this presentation is that I'm not 100% sure how teams get to true high performance without the ability to dialogue and have radically candid conversations about great things, but also about things that need to improve. So radical candor is one way that you can do that. So I also think while talking about what radical candor and everything else is, I think it's important to cover what it is also not. So what radical candor is not. It's not a license to be gratuitously harsh or to front stab. Just don't be a jerk. Super basic concept. It's also not an invitation to nitpick. We want to challenge the things that really matter. So what do we really need to work on? If there's 15 things that were kind of little, but there's really one big overarching theme in those 15 things, that's the thing that we want to be radically candid about and challenge, and the rest will resolve itself. It's not a hierarchical thing. It should be practiced up, down, sideways, all over the organization. It's not only team leaders and people reporting to those team leaders or senior executive leadership and people reporting to senior executives. It's not a hierarchical thing. It should be practiced all over the place. Again, when we do it with grace and very intuitively and with care and kindness, it doesn't matter what level of the organization we're practicing it at. It's also not about endless extroversion. It can be used by extroverts and introverts alike. I think the power of having the tool and the knowledge behind the tool, it makes us really powerful because we have a better understanding, but it's not only about endless extroversion. It's about thinking about what we need to do to be more successful in the future of the organization and of the team. And it's not unique. This is very, very, very human. Okay, now we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about fostering the right environment for all of this. What does that mean? Embedding open dialogue and constructive conversation into your culture via psychological safety, innovation, and breakthroughs. So this is where the rubber meets the road. Now let's talk about psychological safety. So this concept is Timothy Clark's. He's a wonderful man. If you don't know him, go find him on LinkedIn, buy his book, do something, because the stuff that he has done has fundamentally changed the game for me with regards to how I've sort of curated this solution for high performing teams. I truly don't think that you can get to high performance without some degree, ideally a high degree, but without some degree of true psychological safety. So what does it look like? Let's talk about the basic tenets. So it starts with trust and mutual respect. So individuals must feel trusted and mutually respected to express their thoughts, ideas, and concerns without, this is the important part, without fear of retribution or reprisal. So we got to be able to solution to the best of our ability. Sometimes that means throwing out solutions, ideas. We have to be able to do that without fearing the response of judgment, reprisal, whatever. We have to be able to just throw our ideas on the wall and see what sticks. So yeah, trust and mutual respect, huge. Perhaps number one for me. All important, but this is at the top. Second, open communication. Team members feel comfortable sharing their opinions, asking questions, and challenging ideas, fostering an environment of constructive dialogue. This goes right back into the radical candor piece. So being able to just put it on the table, authentically communicate, be radically candid about whether or not an idea is a good one or not. Let's talk about the pros, cons. Let's talk about it all. Open dialogue. Non-punitive environment. So requires creating an environment where mistakes are seen as learning opportunities. What did I say earlier in the presentation? Fail fast. Let's make mistakes. Let's learn from them. When errors occur, individuals feel supported rather than blamed, which promotes a culture of continuous improvement. All we want to do at the end of the day is grow and get better at what we're doing. Fourth, active listening and empathy. Team members genuinely listen to one another, seeking to understand different perspectives. Not everybody has to agree, but we should have some understanding or want to understand each other and demonstrate empathy towards the thoughts and feelings of others. And last on this slide, there's one more to go, welcoming diverse perspectives. Diversity creates some of the most beautiful things that I've ever seen. Diverse perspectives are quite literally why we solution some of the exceptionally complicated problems that we see on the day-to-day. Individuals feel valued and accepted for their unique contributions, regardless of their background, experiences, or viewpoints. Continuing on with the encouragement of risk-taking. Team members must feel empowered to propose new ideas, challenge the status quo, and take calculated risks, knowing they'll be supported even if their ideas don't succeed. We have to be able and we have to encourage this risk-taking mentality so that we can try new stuff, and we have to feel good about it. Supportive feedback and growth. Individuals provide constructive feedback aimed at growth and improvement, focusing on specific behaviors or actions rather than personal criticism. This is where the concept of radical candor can also play a really massive role. How do we get better, and how do we feel sort of safe in doing so? Collaboration and feedback. We got to work together, and we got to be able to talk to each other, and we have to be able to provide that feedback. Again, another big pillar here, it's the radical candor aspect. People feel comfortable in reaching out for help, collaborating with others, and sharing responsibilities. This leads to overall team outcomes for the collective. Continuous learning and adaptation, a major theme throughout everything that we're doing here and everything that we've discussed, is this continuous improvement. Encourages a culture of continuous learning and embraces change, encourages experimentation, and values the ability to learn from both successes and failures. And then lastly, and this is an important one we'll cover a little bit more later too, is it's not an excuse or a free pass. So individuals still must adhere to the principles of respect, kindness, and ethical behavior when engaging in discussions and interactions. Psychological safety isn't a free pass for poor behavior. I think it's probably safe to say that we've all seen Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but if you haven't seen it in a while and you need a little refresher, here it is. And the concept here is that the needs lower down in the hierarchy must be satisfied before we can get to the next stage and attain those higher needs. So starting with basic physiological needs, food, water, sunlight, and then moving into safety needs of security and safety, and so on and so forth, belongingness and love needs, and then all the way to the top, self-actualization. But none of this can happen if the level before it doesn't exist. So bridging into the psychological safety thing, let's flip to the next slide. So just like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there are stages to psychological safety. And this chart on the right-hand side of this slide here is, in a nutshell, psychological safety and all of the associated stages. So there are two axes in this. One is respect and one is permission. There's also a paternalism and exploitation part of this. We're going to have a quick little description of that, but it won't be the focus for today. In the middle, you'll see all your stages, starting with 1, inclusion safety, learner safety, contributor safety, and challenger safety. We'll talk a little bit about the inclusion threshold and the innovation threshold. And then the whole point of all of this is sort of feel included, learn, contribute, innovate, start from the bottom, work your way to the top. So real quick, paternalism, the policy or the practice on the part of people in positions of authority or restricting the freedom and responsibilities of those subordinate to them in the subordinate's supposed best interest. And exploitation, the act or fact of treating someone unfairly in order to benefit from their work. So these are kind of just in the ether here. Again, it's not the focus of today's conversation, but it's important for you to understand the definition for us to move forward. And again, to confirm, the axes are respect and permission, so that's important to note. So then psychological safety requires both respect and the permission to participate. And so paternalism's lack of permission creates fear and social isolation. And unnecessary paternalism runs the risk of breeding dependency and learned helplessness on one hand, and frustration and rebellion on the other. And in general, exploitation's lack of respect creates the fear of harm in addition to the fear of isolation. So those are important things to keep in mind. So now let's just briefly run through the stages. I really encourage you to read Tim Clark's book, The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety, as it will deep dive into each of these and help you give a way more robust understanding. Obviously, this is a big concept to cover in a very short period of time, but there's much more to learn and highly recommend that you do so. So here's what it looks like. So stage 1, inclusion safety. And remember, just like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you cannot have everything else or the peak of the pyramid if you do not have the base level. So we started inclusion safety, and in order for us to get to learner safety, inclusion safety must be present. Same with learner safety. In order for us to get to contributor safety, learner safety and inclusion safety must be in place. So inclusion safety. Here's the key concepts. The choice to include another human being activates our humanity. In childhood, we naturally include. We include people on the playground. We share toys. We do all that stuff naturally, and we exclude unnaturally in adulthood. So it's in our nature. And then in any social unit, inclusion safety can be granted, withheld, revoked, or partially / conditionally granted. So there are stages of this, so to speak. And then excluding a person is more often the result of personal unmet needs and insecurities than a genuine dislike of the person. And I guess I would leave you with the thought that you learn inclusion when you practice inclusion. So it can be learned, but also you get better as you do it. In each of these stages, I'm going to ask you some key questions. It might stir some things inside. It's basically to get your juices flowing and get you to kind of sink into the topic and start thinking. And perhaps some of them might make you feel a little uncomfortable, and I think that's okay too. So the key questions with regards to inclusion safety are, do you feel superior to other people? And if so, why? Is the principle of inclusion a convenient or inconvenient truth for you? And what conscious bias do you have? So just some things to kind of get your thinking caps on and start stirring some discussion. But the basics on the slide is that you're accepted and welcomed into the team. You are brought into the fold. The need to be accepted precedes the need to be heard. So you just want to be a part of the team. So if somebody starts new on your team, and the first thing, you want to make sure that they feel welcome. You want to make sure that they're included. You want to, it's a case where if a new person starts on your team and everybody else goes for drinks, but we don't invite the new person, then obviously this person's not going to want to contribute or not. It has to start here with the basics of inclusion safety. Then we move on to learner safety, which is stage 2. So here's the key concepts of learner safety. The true definition of devastation is no one caring when you fail. It's an interesting thing to ponder. And a hostile learning environment is a place where fear elicits the self-censoring instinct and shuts down the learning process. So when you're in a situation where you don't even want to ask questions, like that, it's awful, right? We should all be so lucky to be inquisitive and curious and keep growing, right? So it's absolutely true that a hostile learning environment is where fear elicits a self-censoring instinct and shuts down the learning process. The moral imperative to grant learner safety is to act first by encouraging the learner to learn. And failure isn't the exception, it's the expectation and the way forward. Because we don't learn anything if we don't make mistakes, and we don't fail. So we have to fail fast, make mistakes, learn from them, do better, all in the cycle of continuous improvement. The most important signal in granting or withholding learner safety is the leader's emotional response to dissent and bad news. So if something happens and somebody responds harshly or is disappointed or has all sorts of emotional feelings along with somebody either making a mistake or failing or whatever the case may be, that's really tough, and that can absolutely withhold learner safety, and that's not what we want. We want people to feel good. We want people to be able to learn, to ask questions. We want them. The whole point is to make sure that people are safe enough to engage in this discovery process, experiment, and as mentioned, make mistakes. Because if we don't make mistakes, we don't ever learn anything. So from a key questions perspective, here's what I want you to think about. When you start working with new people, do you judge their aptitude immediately, or do you suppress that impulse? Do you have patience with them? Does your team punish failure? Do you punish failure? And do you learn, this is my favorite quote, one of my favorite questions of the whole presentation is, do you learn as much or more from your failures as your successes? And I feel absolutely confident in saying I learn way more from my mistakes and my failures than I do my successes. Successes are great and I love hitting home runs, but if we don't fail, we don't learn very much. So let's move on to contributor safety. So stage 3. What are the key components of contributor safety? So when you're competent and willing to hold yourself accountable, you are ready to receive contributor safety. So competent and willing to hold yourself accountable. The exchange of autonomy for results is the basis for human performance. The exchange of autonomy for results is the basis for human performance. And the invitation to think beyond one's role expresses greater respect for the individual and grants greater permission to contribute. So in the case of the slide, you're invited and encouraged to participate as an active member of the team. You're expected to perform work in your assigned role with appropriate boundaries based on the assumption that you can perform competently. So here's some questions to consider. Have you ever had an external threat that removed the fear of challenging the status quo? And do you express any nonverbal cues that might silently marginalize others and sort of create a red zone? The last question is a really interesting one, right? And I think it's sort of up to us to kind of, in a way, police and be self-aware and figure out if any of those nonverbal sort of visual cues might do just that, which is kind of silently marginalize others and maybe make it feel like they can't contribute on an even playing field. And then lastly, it brings us to stage 4, challenger safety. And this is where stuff starts to get interesting, because as soon as you get past stage 3, you hit what's called the innovation threshold. The innovation threshold is sort of where I would consider high-performing teams to sort of thrive. Once you're able to innovate and really break through and come up with new ideas and solution it together, then to me, you have truly reached the pinnacle of a high-performing team. So let's talk about it. Challenger safety, key concepts. Challenger safety democratizes innovation. And the social exchange for challenger safety is cover for candor. So tying directly into somewhat similar what we talked about earlier with regards to radical candor, the social exchange for challenger safety is cover for candor. So you'll have backup. In this process, you should be allowed to be candid and challenge, again, without that fear of retribution or that fear of sort of penalization. In the process of innovation, learning is more important than knowing. And then, in generality, innovation is the process of connected people connecting things. And we're coming up to a little bit more on innovation here in a couple minutes. And then fundamentally and finally, the pattern of innovation is to try a lot and triumph a little. Here's some key questions. So, when was the last time you were brave and challenged the status quo? And I would be curious to know also, like, do you feel like you can challenge the status quo? Do you feel that you have a license to innovate? And how do you protect your team against the dangers of groupthink? We don't just want answers everybody agrees with. I want to be in the rooms with the people who there's some disagreement and perhaps some debate and some learning and all of those things, right? So how do you protect your team against the dangers of groupthink? So to look at this in a little bit of a different context with regards to definition of respect, definition of permission, and the social exchange that happens with all the stages, let's start with inclusion safety. So respect for the individual's humanity and permission for the individual to interact with you as a human being. And the social exchange for that is inclusion in exchange for human status in the absence of harm. What does this all mean? It just means being a part of the team, being safe in the team, feeling included within the team. And then stage 2, learner safety. So respect for the individual's innate need to learn and grow. Well, this is referring to as continuous improvement and, acknowledging people's necessary individual requirement essentially to grow and evolve over time. And permission for the individual to engage in all aspects of that learning process, because that can look like a lot of different things. The social exchange here is encouragement in exchange for engagement, and that's a two-way street. Stage 3, contributor safety, respect for the individual's ability to create value, and permission for the individual to work with independence and their own judgment. So here, again, it's the autonomy in exchange for results. So you do a great job, start to contribute, have the autonomy to do so in the best way that you see fit. There's a lot of trust that's built in this stage. I personally get a lot from stages 3 and 4 within my specific environments. And this is where I do my absolute best work. And I feel it's 100% the same for my team. And then last, but definitely not least, challenger safety. So respect for the individual's ability to innovate, permission for the individual to challenge the status quo in good faith. And then of course, the pinnacle, which is cover in exchange for candor, right? So having the ability to just be super candid, whether we're solutioning or we're having a disagreement or whatever that looks like, with respect, of course, but being absolutely candid. And in exchange for that, we have cover and backup from essentially everybody on the team, whether it's leadership, a team member, whatever that looks like. This is truly where the magic starts to happen. So if you recall a couple of slides ago when we looked at how the stages fit and where that innovation threshold was, and after we surpass contributor safety and we get into challenger safety, that innovation threshold essentially gives us license to solution, problem solve, work with others, figure things out, and again, cover in exchange for candor. So it's truly allows us to kind of step outside the box and figure stuff out. So what does it mean? Looking into the foggy future and trying to make something better by connecting things that are not normally connected by using divergent, associative, or nonlinear thinking. And I love the way that this is laid out in the social origins of innovation. It's either existing knowledge with existing knowledge with new knowledge, or net new knowledge with new knowledge. And a lot of the times when we're innovating, all we're doing is probably taking stuff that we quite possibly already know, and perhaps we combine it with a little bit of new stuff, and then we come up with a new solution. It's not always net new. So we build on what we know using the tools and technology ideas that we already have. And for high performing teams, they can only do this when they've really surpassed that contributor safety level and they get into challenger safety and they feel like they have an environment truly safe and radically candid where they can do their best work without fear of judgment, reprisal, or whatever that looks like. My husband's favorite thing on the planet is movies, so I always include this in my slides when I'm specifically talking about innovation because it's kind of an homage to his love of movies, but also it's a really good example. So Blockbuster, we all know where Blockbuster is now, and it's not really anywhere. And I think there's a lot of people really sad that they can't go to a movie store on a Friday night anymore. But an innovation came from taking compact discs and snail mail. Again, I'm probably really dating myself here, and starting to package that so that people could get their movies in a new way. You no longer wanted to go and rent actual VHS tapes and then have to take them back to the store. So snail mail and compact discs, and Netflix was made, the first version. Look where we are now. So that's a good example of innovation. The Canada Post system existed before this, and so did compact disc. And somebody said, no more Blockbuster, we're going to make a Netflix. And that's what happened. Same with peanut butter and chocolate. What a divine combination. Not like chocolate and mint. Oh, I bet I stirred some stuff there. But peanut butter and chocolate, what an awesome combination, right? Those weren't new things. When Reese's was like, wow, we should take this stuff and put it together. They weren't new things. Somebody just said, I think this might be a great idea. Let's try it. And thus was born one of the greatest snacks in the history of snacks. Another way to talk about everything innovation is from the breakthrough perspective. And graphically, this is just a representation of newer existing knowledge, and that's where we come up with that breakthrough, sort of like we talked on the last slide. So we combine and recombine, and that recombination is the essence of innovation. And the teams that I have worked with, and I would consider truly high performing, have this stuff down to a science. They might not have the solutions down to a science. That's what we're figuring out. That's a part of this entire process. And like I said, through radical candor and psychological safety, those are two key components of being able to get to the best part of innovation, solutioning, breakthroughs, all of the above. So this is what it looks like in a bit of a graphical form, but don't forget the main essence of we combine and recombine, and that recombination is the essence of innovation. How do we actually do all of this? We create a culture of inquiry. This is really, really, really important. Trust is a big piece too, but that's for another day. And it's also a big piece of creating a culture of inquiry. But that culture of being able to ask questions and sort of figure stuff out as you go along and be collaborative with your colleagues and solution together, that's really, truly what this is all about. The entire process of innovation depends on a willingness to activate the inquiry process with questions. If you want a surge of ideas, you first need a surge of questions. You've got to be asking all sorts of stuff. And if you want a surge of questions, you need to nurture the highest level of psychological safety based on respect and permission that you give to people. Trust is a huge part of this. Allowing people to learn that they can trust the environment and that they can, like I said, sort of put their feelers out and start to really understand and start to solution. That's how that happens. The quick wheel here: ask questions, collect data, recognize patterns, reach conclusions, and make decisions. So if you want actionable stuff, start asking yourself the question of when you're at work within your organization or working within your team, are you following this process? And if not, just take the first step. Just start asking some questions, whether it's about a project, whether it's about an internal process. It doesn't matter what it looks like. It matters that we start to get used to the process of asking questions and really trying to push each other out of our comfort zone, again, within the safety of that team space that we're creating where people feel like there really is cover for candor. What are the key takeaways that I want you to leave with here today? There's just 4 of them. They're super basic, and I really hope that I've provided insight towards each. Here they are. Be authentic, open, and communicative. This is, I would say, number 1. All we're trying to do here is communicate better to get our message across so we can net the results that create the type of environment and the type of product and the type of team that we want moving forward. That's all we're trying to do. And how do we do that? If we are authentic, open, and communicative, it does all sorts of stuff for us. It builds trust, it builds team cohesion, and it really drives that high-performing aspect that we're trying to go for here. What's the second one? Watch for your physiological cues. It's going to happen. This will happen both in your professional and in your personal life. When something stresses you out, you're going to start to feel everything that we talked about earlier in the presentation. Watch it, internalize it, regulate it, and manage it so that we're really curating the response that's right for the situation. It's really difficult to do, but self-awareness is the first step. So if you're aware of it, you can sort of feel it, move through it, hopefully in a little bit more of a productive way. Practice what you preach. In leadership and being a leader, I really espouse and try every single day to go out there and be the example. It sounds so cheesy, but to be the example that I want to see in the world. So it would do me no good to have this big conversation today about psychological safety and radical candor if I didn't really practice it every single day. And I guarantee you, if you message any one of my teammates at MMP Digital, they'll tell you this is a part of my everyday work. And I am like this consistently. So practice what you preach. And again, be the type of leader and be the type of change professional that you want to see in the world. So if you want to start that and you want to have a conversation about that, I'd also love that too. So not sure where to start, I'm there for you. And then at the end of the day, we also want to really innovate and create a culture of inquiry, right? We want people to ask the questions. We don't want people to be afraid to solution things. I want to hear what you might think is your crazy answer to something, because you never know when we put all those solutions on a board, what is the magic mix of solution that's going to be the next best thing. So innovation and the creation of this culture of inquiry, that's where we want to go with it. And here we are, just like that, we're at my infamous recommended reading slide. So 2 of the books on this list are from 2 of the creators of the main concepts in this presentation. You have Radical Candor by Kimberly Scott and The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety by Timothy Clark. There are some other authors on here. You've probably seen these books before. They are staples in sort of the communications and professional development sphere. I think this is a great place to start. If these concepts are new and you want to sort of dive in and bite off a little bit more than we've kind of chewed down here today, then please take the time to check out these resources. You can find them all on Amazon, and if you have difficulty, just shoot me a message on LinkedIn, and I'd be more than willing to help. I hope this provides some additional insight to the concepts that I've covered today, and thanks a lot. If you have made it this far, I'm so grateful for your time today. I can only hope that my mission of giving you a few little tools here and there and a few concepts to think about, you might take away with you today and put that into practice in your own organization, with your own team, or in your own situation. So my name is Chelsea Walsh. I would absolutely love to hear from anybody who listens to this. There's a QR code on the screen which you can scan to get to my LinkedIn profile. I've also provided an email address, thechelseawalsh@gmail.com. There's only one of me. I would absolutely love to connect with any and all of you. Talking about people and communication and change and everything that goes into it is an absolute passion of mine, and I love to do it all the time, so please don't be shy. With immense gratitude and thanks to ACMP and my mentor through this process, everybody has been so wonderful. I'm so grateful for your time today, and it's been a real blast. So I'll catch you on the flip side, hopefully on LinkedIn. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye.